This is the heartbeat of human services, a peek into the inspiring stories of our community and all things DHS. Join us.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Heartbeat of Human Services podcast. I'm your host for today, Allison Vota, stepping in for Janice Slagle to talk about Human Trafficking Awareness Month in Kern County. And today's guest is Dr. Angela Look, who is a social service supervisor. Did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Social service supervisor over the CSEC team here at DHS. She also does a lot more than that, so we're going to get into it. I think I wanted to start off as someone who has only been in the department for a few years myself. I think one of the things that I have always wondered is, how did you get started in this?
That's a funny question. All my students at Cal State find out. I never intended to be in this field. I was going to be a clinical psychologist.
Yeah.
So my master's is in clinical psychology. This was not, but I ended up deciding, full-time mental health is not what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So I remember in 2002 when I graduated with my master's, and I'm looking in the classifieds in the paper, like, what can I do with this master's degree?
Yeah.
And there was a foster family agency that said master's in psychology. Mm-hmm. So I called, or I contacted them at that time. They actually turned me down, thank God, because later on I found out that they were not an FFA that I want to work for. But I ended up getting hired at Desert Counseling Clinic to start their foster family agency.
Okay.
I then went to Koinonia when it shut down.
Oh,
yeah. You'd have to look up the news articles on that one. And then a couple of years after being at the FFA, I ended up at the department.
Okay.
Terrified of what was going to happen. And now I had to deal with the bio parents and not knowing, because this was a whole new world for me. I never intended on it.
Yeah.
But because of my clinical background, when I was in court intake, I dealt with a lot of the parents who had the psychological evaluations. Mm-hmm. I did the wraparound program for almost 9 years, working with kids who had, mental health issues and dealing with the mental health teams. And so it's been an amazing, really long journey. I start to age myself, but one that I did not expect at all.
Yeah. So when did the human trafficking aspect come in?
So it was in 2000, after I did wraparound, I did court intake, mm-hmm. I did some other things, and then I promoted to a supervisor. I was a social worker for a really long time before I promoted. And I was supervising voluntary family maintenance and emergency response, mm-hmm. but I've been a forensic interviewer for about 16 years as well. And I have I've always had a desire to help sexual abuse victims. That was my intention as a therapist as well. So my supervisors have all known that, and that's a skill set, I guess, that you could say I have. Mm. So I was supervising an emergency response when all of the state funding started for CSEC.
Okay.
And so they came to me and were like, we're going to end up starting this thing. We don't exactly know how it's going to morph. And so I was very blessed to get in at that time. I worked with Erin Gillespie, who was my program specialist at the time, helped develop what the unit looks like. Some of the roles that we have, like the runaway worker, it's the only position like that. So I've been a part of it ever since October of 2018.
Did you realize how big it was going to be at that time?
No, and that's what I often talk about. It breaks my heart to think back. I worked with the teenage girls in wraparound. Yeah. They are the CSEC unit, honestly. We didn't have the terminology. We didn't have the knowledge base. And so I think back to some of the girls that I worked with who were probably being victimized in this world, and I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I want to help spread the awareness, because I don't want any other social worker to look back and say, I missed it.
Yeah.
Because it truly terrifies me when I think about how many of the girls I worked with who probably had this experience.
So when you took over the CSEC unit, how long ago?
It was October of 18.
When did, because I know you do a lot outside of the CSEC unit with human trafficking. When did that kind of start, the legislation and all of that?
It's just evolved over time, to be quite
mm-hmm.
honest, because in our county, it's really been this evolutionary process over these last 5 years. And I'm so proud of what we've done in Kern, the work that we've done, the collaboration that we've established. And really the state looks at us as trendsetters. And it's pretty awesome. We think a little old Kern County, right? And oh, we're hot. But we really are looked at by all of the state as what you should do. Yeah. The collaboration that you should have, the specialized unit that you can have. I mean, it's really amazing. Mm-hmm. think when we first started, I really had a focus on collaboration with law enforcement. I started every other month we met with law enforcement. At the time, of course, they've all changed positions by now, but I really was trying to establish that foundation of collaboration with them, because knowing that we're going to go out and investigate these referrals that we never used to even investigate, quite honestly, we're going to have to be hand in hand with them. So we started there. That was kind of that first piece. We didn't even have the services provision that we do now. So it's just kind of grown a couple of years, a year into it. I think we ended up finding out about our lived experience expert, Angelica Zuniga. And I remember meeting with her. She was working at McDonald's at the time, honestly. And she came in her McDonald's outfit and met with Aaron Gillespie and myself. And we talked about what we could do together, how we could use her as a lived experience expert. We ended up contracting with her the next year and have contracted with her since. It's now grown to 2 lived experience experts.
So I'm going to stop you for people who may not know, what is a lived experience expert?
So that's the term that we use now. The term also has evolved. Mm-hmm. Everything does, right? Language evolves. We used to call them a survivor advocate.
Okay.
And so that term may also be used. So she is someone who has lived experience. She was a human trafficking victim. She was trafficked by her mother here in Bakersfield for 17 years, in fact. Very long history. She's an amazing woman. So we started to partner with her so that she could come alongside and really mentor our kids, the ones who are still in this, the ones who don't think that there can be life after.
Yeah.
And she can help show that there can be. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So that started. And then this last year, we were able to actually contract with another amazing woman, Ophelia Flores, who's another lived experience expert, who was trafficked locally, familial as well. And so she now also contracts with us, and she's doing amazing work. And then, of course, Odessa Perkins. She doesn't contract with us, but we do a lot of work together, a lot of our speaking engagements, who was also trafficked here locally. So we have some amazing experts who have sadly lived through this life, who can now be a beacon of hope for those who might still be in it or don't even realize that they're in it. And hopefully hearing some of this awareness and their stories might make them go, oh.
Yeah, just the relatability of
absolutely.
Someone who can actually understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
There's 2 kind of questions that come out of what you just said. One of them talking about how we do take care of these mostly girls that come into the care of the CSEC unit. How has that changed?
So I think we are wrapping around them better. Of course, we have specialized staff in the CSEC unit who are more aware and who have a lot better training as to trauma, secondary trauma, all of those things. We see our kids a lot more intensely. So like out on the floor, their expectation is monthly contact. In our unit, it's usually weekly, because we recognize the need is so much higher, right? And the consistency is so necessary to engage this youth and to have established trust.
Yeah.
So the expectations are higher for that. We work very collaboratively for the youth's purpose with our mental health team, with our advocates, with law enforcement. So again, it's been an evolutionary wraparound process where we've gotten better collaboration with all of our partners, be it probation, the Open Door Network. The MISS team over at Curtin Behavioral Health and Recovery Services is like a godsend for many of our kids. It's just been an increase and a better wraparound process.
I know that the CSEC unit is established so that we can give the extra care to those girls.
And boys. We've had boys ever since the very beginning.
Absolutely.
And might I just add?
Yeah.
There are definitely boy victims, and this is one of the misconceptions is it's only girls.
Yeah.
Part of why we don't see them as often, especially as CPS, is because we're working with kids. Research is now telling us it takes about 20 years for a male to be able to voice what happened to him. So we don't usually see them because they're already adults by then.
That's great insight, because I feel like, I mean, even myself, I do it. Women, girls, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that something that the CSEC unit has kind of taken an interest in, like how we can
better serve boys?
Yeah.
That has been an interest both in our unit, but also at the state level. That's something that we talk about all the time because, we work with survivors such as Russell Wilson, not the quarterback, but Russell Wilson is an amazing survivor who contracts with PACT, which is our Preventing and Addressing Child Trafficking, which is a statewide collaborative, and we're a part of it. And he talks about that. When he recognized his own victimization, the only thing that he could access was a rape crisis center. How does a boy go in there and get help?
Yeah.
And so it is definitely on the radar. In fact, even at the JUST conference, which is the Juvenile Sex Trafficking nationwide annual conference, I think it was last year that they were really emphasizing making sure you have services that a male is going to feel comfortable going in and getting. And it's something we've talked about here because I don't think that we have enough to meet the needs, especially on the labor trafficking side. I think we see more males who are labor trafficked. And then the question is, how are we best serving them?
It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And there is a ton of stuff coming up. What are some of the events that you would like to highlight for our listeners?
So on that same day, we're going to have what's called the Truth Transforms Symposium. And it's one I'm really excited for. I'm a member and a steering member of KCAT, our current coalition against human trafficking. And this year we wanted to emphasize and highlight our local lived experience experts because we have such amazing women who have sadly gone through such horrific ordeals, but yet now, like I said, are doing amazing things. So we are having them be the highlight on the 17th, and they will, there's going to be some videos from some of them, like question and answer, and that is at the Beale Library at 6 p.m. And we'll also have some tables out there with resources and things like that. I think it'll be a great time. I'm really, really excited. We want to highlight them, show all the work that they're doing, because they're all kind of going in their own respective ways too, which is really, really awesome to watch as they're evolving and becoming, more and more active in this work. So that's on the 17th, which will be great. Then on the 25th, it's the Safeguard Conference, and I'm so sad. I was supposed to be a speaker, and then I ended up with the graduate class that I'm teaching, and so I can't be there. But Faith Heath is somebody in this community who's working in this fight as well, and her nonprofit Helping Us is putting on the Safeguard Conference, and it's really focused on parents and kids and how to help safeguard our kids, especially with all that happens online.
Yes.
So kids are welcome at that one. I'm not saying they're not at the others, but that's kind of the special topic at this one. And that's at the gathering. And then we have our second annual race, the 5K, on the 27th at Riverwalk. And then we're kind of rounding out the month at the Summit Coffee Shop. They have the big room up there. We're going to be showing California's Forgotten Children documentary. And that's a really powerful documentary that follows several people who have gone through this life. It helps show some of the vulnerabilities, some of the factors that went into that, and it's really them sharing their story so that we can all learn from them. And I'm so excited because I've watched this a few years back, and I was like, I want to bring it, but then last year we did the Wake Up movie, and it just had never happened. And then I was on a meeting about this movie, and I'm like, okay, this is the time, we're bringing it. And so I'm really excited for that one, and it's free to the community, and it's free to whomever wants to come, because we just want people to learn and be able to be aware.
3 of the lived experience experts that you brought up, 2 of them you pointed out that it was family that trafficked them. And that's kind of a misconception, right? In this community.
And actually the crazy thing is all 3 of the lived experience experts that we work with and contract with and who are speaking at the Truth Transforms, it was all familial trafficking. So that's why I tell people when I train, don't ever think some kid's story is too crazy. Like, no, a parent wouldn't do that. Or, unfortunately, sometimes they would. And it, sometimes they have their own mental health issues, substance abuse issues. Maybe they're already in the life and they pull their daughter into it. That's what happened to Angelica. So don't ever dismiss something that you hear. Let us figure out, right? Let us call it in and let us investigate and see. But it's not too crazy to think it's a parent or another family member, because like for Ophelia, it was her sister.
Yeah. And you also brought up keeping children safe and how to keep your own children safe. So I did want to ask that question because I know my own sister actually asked me, she's like, is there any resources to keep your own children safe at home?
So if those of you don't know, I'm also a mother of 9. So, and 6 of those are bio, some adopted, legal guardianship, chosen, whatever. So I face this as a mom too. And so it's something very near and dear to my heart. And of course, my kids might know a lot more than most kids, but yes, there's many different ways. And I know Jana kind of alluded to this question. I really had to think this one through because it's different with each kid too. And I have different ages and stages. And so you're not just going to go in there and graphically tell a little kid about human trafficking and this is what happens. But there are appropriate ways you can have some of those conversations to help reduce their vulnerabilities, right? Yeah. So, like, for example, years ago, unfortunately, my son fell prey to talking to someone on a video game. My son, who had me as a mom, who had taught him all this, And so because of that, first of all, I realized how easily it can happen. But a rule in our house was established because of that. None of my boys can play a video game with anybody that they've not met in real life. Mm-hmm. And they'll all snitch on each other too. They'll be like, oh, Ashton's playing with someone he doesn't know. Because they know that's a rule, but they also know the why. I'm a really big advocate of talking to your kid, not of just, this is the rule, you can't use your phone. Help explain why, not in really scary terms, but to help them understand. Yeah. We're there to help teach them and guide them. And eventually they have to start making these choices. Because guess what? Even if you control everything and your kid has no phone and no access to internet, once they go to school, they do. So what have you done, really, you know? So helping them understand the why, paying attention to who they're talking to, ask those questions. You know, I use a lot of parental controls on my kids' phones. We've had the Bark app in the past. It was too much with me. I have 4 teenagers. And so we were getting texts all the time. And I'm like, okay, this is too much. For some people, that might be great. There's a lot of apps out there for parents. You can research them. I don't know them all. We do it all now just through AT&T. You know, we have to approve every app our kids get. We get to set times that their phones work and don't work, all of those kind of things. Because what we know from recent research is 87% of kids go to bed with their phone. Mm. So parents go to sleep thinking everything's fine. All the while at 3 a.m., your kid's talking to whomever, and he says, come meet me outside, and they think this is their boyfriend, and so they go. Yeah. You wake up to what? So the phone thing is huge. And, you know, we have littles having phones, which I completely disagree with, but that's a parenting choice. So, you know, I often say with technology, what that has created is who has access to our kids and what our kids have access to. Yeah. Because we also know very, very much based on research that pornography leads to higher demand for sex and is a piece of exploitation. And I've had to have those uncomfortable conversations, believe me, not what I wanted to talk about with my teenage son, about porn. And if he chose to look at that, of course, I don't want him to, but if he chose to, I wanted him to understand he was helping exploit little girls. And he looked at me like, what? Those girls didn't want to be in those pictures or be there or take those, you know, videos. You are creating the demand by which there is now a supply. Yeah. So having those conversations are not fun, but really important because we really need to help this next generation change what they think about sex, change what they think about the opposite, you know, gender and what a relationship looks like and all of those things, because that's how we can help start to reduce demand. Because until we start to do that, this problem's just going to continue. Yeah. You know, one of the children that we chose to bring into our family was from a very different background than ours. And I talked to him about the music that he listened to, because so much of the music perpetuates this objectification, this sexualized thinking, you know, all of these things. And he had never thought about it before. And so I started to bring that to his attention. And now he's like, oh, I know you hate that, huh, Mom? And I'm like, sure do. And this is why, you know? Yeah. And so with that kid, it was really kind of talking about that because he had come from such a different place and he hadn't been raised with my craziness. My daughters, you know, they were kind of approaching their teenage years as I got into this work. And so they're very well-grounded, very intelligent girls. I never necessarily feared that they would become a victim per se, but they both watched the Wake Up movie with me. I thought they could handle it. So they both saw the Wake Up movie. One of them saw Sound of Freedom with me. I've given them some of the survivor books that we have that aren't graphic. And I remember my daughter saying, she was probably 14 when I gave her one of the books. She's like, Mom, you think this is going to happen to me? And I said, I hope not, sister, but this way you can also help your friends. Like help you be aware to help other people. Mm-hmm. She's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And my younger daughter, who I think she was probably 15 or 16 when we saw Sound of Freedom and she'd already seen Wake Up, I asked her kind of her thoughts on both of the movies, and I have my own thoughts. But I remember her saying, they're both really good. They're both really hard to watch. But I want my friends to see the Wake Up movie because that's what could happen to them. Mm-hmm. So with each kid, I think it has to be different. Yeah. But a parent has to be willing to have those hard conversations. A parent has to be present. Yeah. Take the time. It takes a lot of energy, like, don't get me wrong. And I don't want to have all those conversations, but what's going to happen if you don't?
I think of in my own family, my nieces play Roblox and you know things like that. And
we've had several recent referrals about Roblox. Yeah, it's like it's a kid game. Mm-hmm. Guess what? 750,000 predators are online. Where kids are, predators are. Yeah. And parents get very naive to think, oh no, it's just kids on there. No, it ain't.
Just so many things that it's like you got to be a part of their life and know what's happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can't just use it as your babysitter and walk away.
Exactly. I know during this month, we're also doing a training for staff.
Yep.
So a lot of our listeners are staff here at DHS. So I kind of want you to make a pitch for why they should care, I guess. Why should they attend this training and why it's important for all of us to understand what's going on?
Because you're seeing these kids.
Yeah.
They're on your caseload, or they'll be on your caseload, and or even in your life, right? Like it's nobody's immune. And if you ever think that it couldn't be mine, like you're in a very dangerous place, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't want any of our staff to ever look back and feel like me. How many of the kids did I see and miss?
Yeah.
It's very important. And, this training, I would love for old staff to come and have a refresher for new staff that, I wasn't able to do induction for, because we know how vulnerable foster youth are. So different research has shown between 68 and 86% of trafficking victims had social workers in their life who didn't see it. Wow. 86%. Yeah. That is crazy. So we are working with these kids. And if we just don't realize what we're looking at, then we miss it. And where we could have perhaps helped, they don't get it.
Yeah.
And we know that the life expectancy is 7 years. How are you going to feel when you now get the news that kid's dead? Because sadly, we've lost 3 girls in our unit. Mm. One of them I had worked with closely, and it, if you can tell, still hits kind of hard.
Yeah.
So this is real. This is happening to kids you're going to work with.
Yeah. And
you need to be aware.
And that's on January 25th.
Yes.
And I believe there was an email sent out to all staff. Is it, they have to RSVP or?
Yeah, through the training email.
Okay.
And right now I have it set up for 9 to 12 in Kern River room. If it gets too full, because that's not the biggest room, we can do an afternoon slot as well. So I'm willing to do both. It'll be a long day, but I'm willing to do both if it were to get that full.
Yeah, absolutely. So for staff listening, be sure to check it out. I know that and
it counts for ICPM hours.
Okay, good to good to know. I know that we've watched Angela present at some of the trainings that we've been to for the Career Network for Children, some other things, and it's very eye-opening. I know for our staff, we always walk away from it being like, how did we not know that? And we work out in the community, not as social workers, but it's even in your own personal life, it's just absolutely invaluable. This one last question is actually about your Senate Bill 14.
Not my bill, but I was there.
Yes. I'm going to call it your bill. I'm just kidding.
Oh, I'd love to take credit.
But I know that, we've talked about partnerships already in this, and the Senate Bill 14 was just kind of this moment of yes.
Yes. Huge,
finally,
huge.
So if you want to kind of talk about how you got involved in it, and, maybe when you get that first call or whatever it was.
So it all started, actually, most people don't know, when Tyson McCoy was our deputy district attorney, right after he had come. I think he was, working with Senator Grove, and it was nothing I'd ever been involved with. He asked me to help write kind of the first, kind of like the evidence for Senator Grove to kind of take this bill forward. It all went from there. But so I kind of put together research-based information that he then provided, which was helped to be part of what they drafted, and kind of went from there. So I was kind of at the inception, and then every time we had hearings, I was there. I was never a key witness, but I was able to always say those Me Too statements that I supported the bill.
Yeah.
And so that first year, it was actually SB 1042, and I'd have to look at the years. It might have been 21. Where Senator Grove had written the bill that human trafficking of anyone would be a serious and violent felony. Made sense to me. I completely upheld that. This is great. And it was shot down at the very first hearing. That was really devastating, and I can picture it now in my head. I had actually taken my two teenage daughters with me. I took a vacation day, and I went up there, and my daughters went with me. I wanted them to see, this is the process. This is huge, right? And so we all went in and did our Me Too statements that we were in support of the bill, and we were having to watch it on a screen because that was still COVID time. And Senator Weiner from the Bay Area, totally slashed our bill. And everyone's in tears and crying. All of the survivors who were there speaking were in tears. My daughters were in like, it was such an emotional day. Senator Grove comes out and like apologizes to all of us. And we're like, you did everything, you know? So after that, fast forward a few months and we're in 2022. What I really learned, there was so much that happened through this process, and I can say so much, but I so appreciate that Senator Grove took the time, because she was really committed to this fight, that, okay, what can we do? So she listened to all kinds of survivors. She listened to the opposite side. What were their objections to the bill?
Yeah.
She made modifications, like she took it back. And so now it was SB 14, which modified, it was just the human trafficking of a minor. So before it was everyone, of a minor, and it was a serious felony, not violent, because we know there's some legal stuff over here. If it's a violent felony, you can't have your record expunged later. So if it were ever to be a victim who became convicted, we didn't want them to never get that off their record. So we took out the violent, or she took out the violent. It wasn't me. But serious means it can be a strikeable offense, because what we know has happened, and it's happened here in Kern County back in 2022. Kawan Richardson is a prime example. We know that traffickers are going to traffic again because it's very lucrative. So Kawan Richardson was convicted of trafficking of a minor in Orange County in 16 or 17. I'd have to look back. I apologize. My dates are getting mixed up. He was convicted, sentenced to 8 years, only did 3, which was normal. Came immediately to Kern County and started trafficking our victims, our minors.
Yeah.
I think we had three minors here, as well as adult victims. Our unit worked with them, was a part of the investigation. And so then he was convicted here of that. But I mean, as soon as he got out, he came here and did it again, because SB 14 wasn't in play then. So it wasn't a strikeable offense. He gets out and he's a repeat offender. So now, fast forward with SB 14 that just went into effect January 1st, human trafficking of a minor is a serious felony, which means it is now a strikeable offense. And for a repeat offender, it will impact them differently, and they won't be able to get out on good time. So they'll have to stay in prison. And there was a big contention, like, oh my gosh, at some of the hearings, like, prison isn't effective for recidivism and all that kind of stuff, or for rehabilitation, yada, yada. And I said, you know what, at some point, it just comes down to safety. If they're in prison, they're not going to be doing it again. And my kids are safer for that moment, for those extra years that they're in. I'm not really caring about their rehabilitation. I'm caring about safety and justice for their victims. Because guess what? This is lifelong trauma. This isn't something you get over. He's in prison for 3 years. They still have their trauma after 3 years. So how are we upholding the perpetrator more than our victims? I was there at each of those hearings, the good and the bad. Odessa Perkins was one of the key witnesses at each hearing. And thankfully, it finally did pass. And we'll just barely start seeing the impact, because it just went into effect. And then where that will go from here. I hope and pray that someday we have human trafficking of anyone be a serious felony, because it should be. And really, most of the adults that we find started out as kids. So it's, it still is like they did traffic a child. We just didn't find them in time.
So for any of the members of the public, if they see someone, or if they see something that concerns them and they feel as if a minor, or if anyone might be trafficking, what would you recommend they do?
So definitely, if it's a child, they can call our hotline, the 631-6011, and you can do that as a professional or as anybody in the community. Of course, law enforcement, we work hand in hand with law enforcement on the daily basis. We have some amazing detectives, so you can always call law enforcement, and that can be for an adult or a minor. And we also have a really great resource in the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which people can call or text. I can't remember the 888 number off the top of my head, but they can text BeFree 233-733 and say, hey, I want to report this. Or if they actually need help, they can say help. And so that can be for a victim as well. But the National Human Trafficking Hotline then sends out whatever they get to the appropriate jurisdictions. So it'll still get back to us. If somebody doesn't feel safe calling our hotline or calling our law enforcement, they can call that or text that, and it'll still get back over here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Angela. We really appreciate it. And I think this month is really important to let the public know that Kern County, it happens here.
Absolutely.
It happens here, and that it can unfortunately happen to you or to someone someone you care about. Thank you, everyone, for listening to today's podcast. If you want more information on January Human Trafficking Awareness Month, visit our website, kcdhs.org, or if you want to get some more personal information, email us at social@kerndhs.com in reference to this podcast or any other podcast, and we would be happy to kind of point you in the right direction. Thank you.
Welcome, listeners, to Your Mindful Minute. Today's episode, we will be going over the benefits of single tasking. You most likely guessed that single tasking is the opposite of multitasking. All it requires is showing up fully to whatever task you're working on. If you're working on the computer, focus on one task at a time. As much as you may not want to, close all the browser tabs that aren't relevant to the project you're working on. This can help free up mental space, create less chaos, and might even create laser focus. To deepen the practice, try focusing on things like how your breathing is, how your body feels in your seat, or how your feet feel against the floor, the sensation of the air or your clothes against your skin, or the structure and posture of your body. If you can relate to this, then try out this exercise. It might just help ease your stress. This has been your Mindful Minute.
Thank you for joining us for the Heartbeat of Human Services podcast today. We hope you'll join us next time.